The envelope was sitting on the kitchen pass-through at 6:47 in the morning. I almost didn't see it. I was doing what I always did at 6:47, which was walking through the hotel with my first cup of coffee, checking that everything was where it should be before the guests came down for breakfast. The dining room chairs were straight. The flowers on the front desk had been changed. The fire in the common room was already going, which meant someone had been up before me, which meant Liam had been up before me, which was not unusual because Liam was almost always up before me. The envelope had my name on it. Just June. No last name. His handwriting, which I recognized because I had been looking at his handwriting on order forms and menu notes and the little chalkboard above the kitchen door for 2 years. I set down my coffee. I picked up the envelope. And I stood there in the doorway between the dining room and the kitchen for a long moment, because I already knew what was inside, the way you sometimes know things before you open them, and I was not ready for what knowing it meant. I should tell you about the coffee first. When Liam Walsh came to work at the Birchwood Inn 2 years ago, I interviewed him in the dining room on a Tuesday afternoon in October. He was 26, recently moved from Portland, had worked in 2 good restaurants and 1 very good hotel kitchen, and had references that made my chef at the time, who was leaving to open his own place, call him the best line cook she'd ever worked with. He was calm in the interview, not nervous, not performative, just present, the way some people are present, like they're not thinking about anywhere else. I asked him the usual questions. He gave good answers. At the end, I asked if he had any questions for me. He said, "How do you take your coffee?" I looked at him. He said, "I ask everyone that. It tells me how a kitchen should run." I said, "Black, 1 sugar." He nodded like I'd confirmed something. He started the following Monday. By Wednesday, there was a cup waiting for me on the pass-through every morning at 6:47, which was when I always started my walk-through, which I had not told him. Black, 1 sugar, the right temperature, which is hotter than most people make it, and not quite as hot as it sounds. I thanked him the first time, the second time, the third. By the end of the first week, I had stopped saying thank you, because it had simply become part of the morning, the way the fire in the common room was part of the morning, and the flowers on the front desk were part of the morning. I did not think about what it meant that he knew. The Birchwood Inn has 9 rooms, a dining room that seats 30, a common room with 2 fireplaces, and a kitchen that is too small for what we ask of it, and has been too small since my husband Robert and I bought the property 11 years ago. Robert died 4 years ago, heart attack, sudden, the kind that gives you no warning and no time to say the things you should have said. He was 47, I was 38. I had loved him with the specific, settled love of someone who has built something real with another person, not dramatic, not uncertain. The love that accumulates over years of shared decisions and shared meals and shared silence that doesn't need to be filled. After he died, I kept the inn running because I didn't know what else to do, and because the inn had been ours, and keeping it felt like keeping something of him. The first year was survival. The second year was routine. By the third year, I had rebuilt the thing into something that worked, something that maybe worked better than it had before, because I was paying attention to every detail the way people pay attention to things when they have nothing else to hold on to. I was not lonely, exactly. I had the inn, and the staff, and the guests, and the small Vermont town that had absorbed me as one of its own after 11 years. I had my sister in Burlington who called every Sunday. I had a life that was full in all the ways a life can be full without being complete. I had not thought about what was missing until the morning I picked up that envelope. Liam had been with us for 6 months when I first understood that he was exceptional. Not just at cooking, though he was that. He had a specific talent for knowing what a room needed before the room knew. He adjusted the menu the week a family came to stay, whose teenage daughter turned out to be a picky eater, without being asked, just by watching the first dinner. He noticed when the dishwasher was struggling, and stayed late to help without making it visible. He suggested a Thursday evening soup and bread service for locals in the off-season that became one of our most consistent revenue streams. He also, without ever commenting on it, started handling things I hated handling. Not because I'd asked him to, just because he noticed and did them. The produce supplier who was consistently late, the linen company that kept sending the wrong order, the small repairs that required someone to wait for a service person for 3 hours on a Tuesday. I would find these things resolved, quietly, without announcement, and when I thanked him, he would say something like, "It wasn't a problem," or "I had the time," and go back to the kitchen. My assistant manager, Clara, said to me once, "You know he could run this place." I said, "He's a cook." She gave me a look I didn't entirely understand at the time. I noticed other things too, if I'm being honest with myself. I noticed that when I came into the kitchen during service, which I tried not to do too often, because a kitchen during service has its own ecosystem that should not be disrupted by the person who signs the checks, Liam always knew I was there without looking up. He'd hand something off and turn around in a way that seemed like he'd been expecting me. I noticed that he remembered things. Not just my coffee. My sister's name. The anniversary of Robert's death, which passed every April without comment from anyone except Clara, and which Liam marked by leaving a small bunch of the yellow tulips Robert had planted along the south fence on the kitchen pass-through, with no note and no acknowledgement when I thanked him later. I noticed that our conversations, which had started as purely professional and stayed that way for longer than they needed to, had gradually become something else. Not unprofessional, just longer, fuller. The kind of conversations where you find yourself standing in a doorway longer than you meant to because you haven't quite finished. I noticed all of these things. I put them somewhere I wasn't looking. He was 26, I was 40, he was my employee, I was his employer. These were not small facts. And I had spent 4 years learning to live without the specific gravity of being loved by someone, and I was not sure I remembered how to let that back in, or if I wanted to. A year into his time at the Birchwood, Liam hired a sous chef named Petra, a woman his own age, recently trained, very talented. I watched for signs that something was happening between them, the way you watch for things you're not sure you want to see. Nothing happened. They worked well together. They seemed to like each other in the uncomplicated way of colleagues who are good at the same things. Clara told me I had been watching the kitchen a lot lately. I told her I was keeping an eye on the new hire. Clara said, "Sure." That was when I understood that whatever I had been putting somewhere I wasn't looking had not stayed there. I opened the envelope standing in the doorway. His letter was 1 paragraph. He had found a position at a hotel in Burlington. He was grateful for the 2 years. He would work out whatever notice period I needed. He hoped I would understand. He hoped I would understand. I read it twice. Then I walked into the kitchen. Liam was at the stove, starting the breakfast prep, the kitchen already smelling like butter and bread, and the specific warm smell that had become inseparable from mornings at the Birchwood. He heard me come in and turned around, which he always did, and saw my face, which I was not managing well, and went very still. We looked at each other across the kitchen. "You're leaving," I said. He looked at the letter in my hand. "I found a position," he said. "I know." I read the letter. He didn't say anything. He turned back to the stove, adjusted something that didn't need adjusting, and then turned back. "Is this about something I did wrong?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "No," he said. "It's about something I don't think I can keep doing right." I didn't ask him what he meant. I told him I would process the letter and we would discuss the transition. I walked back out of the kitchen. I did my walkthrough in the way I did everything that required me to keep moving, which was by moving and not thinking until I could think safely. I lasted until 11 that morning. Then I went back to the kitchen, during the mid-morning quiet between breakfast and lunch prep, and I found him at the prep table, writing the week's menu on the small chalkboard. "I need you to tell me what you meant," I said. He set down the chalk. He turned around. He looked at me with the expression of someone who has made a decision and is now standing on the other side of it, calm in the way people are calm when they've already done the hard part. "I've been here 2 years," he said. "I know how you take your coffee. I know which supplier makes you tense, and which guests you like, and which table in the dining room you sit at when you think no one will notice. I know you keep Robert's reading glasses in the drawer by the front desk, even though you've never needed reading glasses. I know you start your walkthrough at 6:47, because that's when he used to." I had not told him about the walkthrough. He went on, quietly, like he was reading something he had already written. "I know I work for you. I know the difference in our ages. I know you haven't thought about me that way, and I'm not asking you to. But I've spent 2 years being careful and professional, and I've done that because I respect you, and because I didn't want to make things difficult. And I've been trying to leave for 6 months, but I keep not leaving, and I need to actually leave now, because staying is getting harder than going." He stopped. The kitchen was very quiet. "I've been waiting for you to notice," he said, "and I think part of me knows you have, and I think that's the part that's making this impossible." I stood there for a long time. Not long by any real measure. A minute, maybe, but long enough for everything I had been not looking at for 2 years to stop being something I was not looking at. He had not asked me for anything. He was not asking me for anything now. He was simply telling me a true thing, and then leaving, which was the most careful, most considered thing he could have done, and which was exactly like him. I thought about Robert. I thought about the 4 years since. I thought about what it means to build a life and then have to learn to live in it differently. And I thought about 6:47 in the morning for 2 years. Black, 1 sugar, the right temperature. Every morning, without being asked. I said, "How long did you know?" He said, "Pretty much from the beginning." I said, "That's a long time to make someone coffee." Something shifted in his face. "Long enough to know how you take it," he said. I did not ask him to stay. Not that day. I told him I needed time to think, which was honest, and he said he understood, which I believed, and he went back to the menu chalkboard, and I went back to the front desk, and we did not speak again until dinner service, which we got through with the specific professionalism of 2 people who are thinking about something else. That night I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and looked at the mountain that had been visible from this porch for 11 years, first with Robert and then without him, and I thought about what Liam had said. "I've been waiting for you to notice. Not waiting for me to feel a certain way, not waiting for me to do anything, just waiting for me to see what was already there. I had seen it. I had put it somewhere I wasn't looking, because I was afraid of what it would mean to let it matter, afraid of the age difference, and what people in a small Vermont town would say about the inn owner and her cook, afraid of what it meant about Robert and the life we'd had, afraid, mostly, of what it would mean to need something again, after I had spent 4 years learning not to need things. I thought about what Clara had said. "You know he could run this place." She had not been talking about the kitchen. The next morning I was in the kitchen at 6:30. Earlier than usual. Earlier than Liam. I made the coffee myself. I made 2 cups. I put them on the pass-through. When he came in at 6:40 and saw the cups, he stopped walking. He looked at the cups. He looked at me. I said, "I don't actually know how you take yours." He said, "Black, no sugar." I said, "Of course." He picked up his cup. I picked up mine. We stood on opposite sides of the pass-through, and outside the kitchen window, the Vermont morning was doing what Vermont mornings do in November, gray and still, and just beginning. I said, "I'm not asking you to stay because I need a cook." He waited. I said, "I'm asking you to stay because I've been putting something somewhere I wasn't looking for 2 years, and I think it's time I looked at it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That might be the most careful way anyone has ever told me something." I said, "I'm a careful person." He said, "I know." He set his cup down. He looked at me across the pass-through. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. We were careful after that, in the way of 2 people who understand that the thing they're building is worth being careful with. We did not make announcements. We did not change anything visible at the inn. We had dinner together on his nights off, in the dining room after the guests had gone up, or at the small restaurant in town that stayed open late on Fridays. Clara knew. She had known before we did, probably. She did not make a thing of it, which was one of the many reasons I valued her. The town figured it out by spring, the way small towns figure out everything, which is not all at once but gradually, in the accumulation of small observations. A few people said things, most people said nothing, and watched and formed opinions they kept to themselves, which is also how small towns work. Liam handled it by being exactly who he was, which was the same person at the farmer's market on Saturday as he was in the kitchen on Tuesday, which made it difficult to argue with his presence in my life even for people who wanted to. I handled it by letting the inn speak for itself, which had always been my best argument for anything. The first time I understood that we had become something I hadn't let myself imagine, we were in the kitchen on a Sunday evening in March, after a long weekend at full occupancy, when everything that could go wrong had gone slightly wrong in the specific manageable way of a busy inn in mud season. The guests had all checked out. The staff had gone home. Liam was making something simple for dinner because we were too tired for anything complicated, eggs and toast and the last of the week's roasted vegetables. I was sitting at the prep table with my shoes off and a glass of wine, talking about nothing in particular, and I looked up and he was watching me with the expression he had, the one I had spent 2 years not looking at. "What?" I said. "Nothing," he said. "I just like this." I looked around the kitchen, the mess of a full weekend, the familiar smell, the last light coming through the window above the sink. "Me too," I said. And I meant it. Not in the way I had meant things that were about surviving, or managing, or keeping something running. I meant it the way you mean things when you are simply where you want to be. He proposed in the kitchen. I should not have been surprised, and I was completely surprised. It was a Tuesday morning, 6:47. The coffee was on the pass-through, same as always, and I had just finished my walk-through and come in to find him writing the day's specials on the chalkboard. He turned around and said, "I want to ask you something." I said, "All right." He said, "I know it hasn't been that long, and I know you've already built a whole life and I'm not trying to replace any part of it, but I'd like to keep making you coffee for the rest of my life, and I wanted to ask if that would be all right with you." I looked at him. He was holding a ring, simple, small, the kind of ring that says, "I paid attention to who you are." I said, "That is genuinely the strangest proposal I've ever heard." He said, "Is that a yes?" I looked at the ring. I looked at him. I looked at the kitchen that had been mine and Robert's, and then just mine, and was now, unmistakably, also his. I said, "You already know how I take my coffee." He said, "Yes?" I said, "Then yes." We got married in the inn's garden in September, when the Vermont hills had just started to turn. Small ceremony. Clara was there, and my sister, and the regular guests who had become something like family over the years, and the farmers and shop owners from town who had watched the whole thing unfold from a careful distance and decided, eventually, that it was none of their business, and also exactly right. Liam's parents came from Portland. His mother cried. His father shook my hand and said my son has been talking about this inn for 2 years, and I see now why. I did not tell him that what his son had been talking about was probably not the inn. At the reception, Clara made a toast. She said, "June, I have been watching you not notice things for 2 years, and I am very relieved we are all finally done with that." Everyone laughed. Liam looked at me. I said quietly, so only he could hear, "I did notice." He said, "I know." He took my hand. Outside the garden, the Vermont hills were doing what they do in September, which is turn every color at once, all of it happening at the same time, unhurried and complete. I had built a life in this place once before. I was building one again. The coffee was still on the pass-through every morning at 6:47. It always would be. There is a particular kind of morning at the Birchwood in winter. The guests are still asleep. The staff does not arrive until 7. The inn is entirely quiet in the way that old buildings are quiet, which is not silent, but full of small sounds. The settling of wood, the wind off the mountain, the fire I have already started in the common room, because some habits do not change. I do my walkthrough at 6:47. I check that everything is where it should be. The dining room chairs, the flowers on the front desk, the fire. And then I come to the kitchen doorway, and the coffee is on the pass-through, same as it has been every morning for 3 years now. Black, 1 sugar, the right temperature. Liam is at the stove. He hears me come in. He turns around. "Good morning," he says. "Good morning," I say. We have had this exchange every morning for 3 years. It does not get smaller with repetition. If anything, it gets larger, the way things get larger when you understand what they contain. I pick up the coffee. He turns back to the stove. Outside the kitchen window, the Vermont morning is just beginning, gray turning pale at the edges, the mountain visible against the sky, the garden where we got married last September, already frosted and still. I think about the envelope on the pass-through. I think about standing in this doorway, knowing what was inside before I opened it. I think about everything I had been not looking at for 2 years, and the morning I finally looked, and what it meant to let something matter again after you have spent a long time learning not to. I take a sip of coffee. It is exactly right, same as always. "I've been waiting for you to notice," he had said. I had noticed. I had just needed time to understand that noticing was not a betrayal of what came before. That a heart does not replace one thing with another. It simply, if you let it, finds room for what is still becoming. "Liam," I say. He turns around. "Thank you," I say. "For the coffee." He looks at me with the expression I stopped not looking at a long time ago. "You've been thanking me for coffee for 3 years," he says. "I know," I say. "I'm going to keep doing it." He smiles, the kind of smile that knows something. "I know," he says. And outside the window, the Vermont morning keeps arriving, quiet and unhurried, the way good things do.